Imagine you are the ruler of a country that has declared neutrality in World War II. And one August morning in 1941, British tanks roll in from the south. Soviet troops pour in from the north, and within days your army collapses and you are forced into exile. That was Iran, then called Persia, caught between global empires who claimed they were there to protect it, but whose real motives were oil, railways, and fear of Hitler's shadow spreading across the Middle East. In this video, we'll explore what happened to Iran at the end of World War II, and why Britain and the Soviet Union chose to attack a country that insisted it just wanted to stay out of the war. Iran before the war. At the start of the war, Iran was ruled by Reza Shah Pahlavi, a strong man who had spent the 1920s and 1930s trying to modernize his country, building railways, centralizing power, and reducing the grip of foreign powers like Britain and Russia. Officially, Iran declared itself neutral in World War II, but neutrality on paper did not mean neutrality in the minds of London and Moscow. Reza Shah relied heavily on German engineers and technicians to help build Iran's infrastructure, which worried the Allies as Nazi influence grew in Europe. Why Iran suddenly mattered? By 1940, Iran's oil had become a critical resource for the British war effort. Its refineries produced millions of tons of oil a year, feeding the Royal Navy and Allied industry. When Germany invaded the Soviet Union in June 1941, Iran's geography became even more important. It sat between the Persian Gulf and the Soviet Southern Front, making it the perfect land bridge for sending American and British supplies to the Red Army, a route that became known as the Persian Corridor. For Britain, there was an extra layer of anxiety. If Nazi Germany ever gained influence in Iran, it could threaten the vital Anglo-Iranian oil company installations and the British Empire's communications with India. Allied suspicions and rising tension, British officials claimed that there were too many German nationals in Iran and that some might be involved in espionage or sabotage, although later research suggests that German influence was probably exaggerated as a justification for invasion. London and Moscow repeatedly pressured Reza Shah to expel German citizens and align more clearly with the Allies. But he resisted, insisting on neutrality and his right as a sovereign state. From the Soviet perspective, any potential German foothold in Iran was a direct threat to the Caucasus and the vital Soviet oil fields around Baku, and it could also endanger their southern flank during the desperate fight against Hitler. The decision to invade by the summer of 1941, British and Soviet planners had decided that leaving Iran neutral was too risky, so they agreed on a joint invasion codenamed Operation Countenance. At dawn on August the 25th, 1941, British and Commonwealth forces attacked from Iraq and the Persian Gulf in the south, while Soviet forces crossed Iran's northern borders. Iranian resistance was quickly overwhelmed by their superior armor, aircraft, and coordination. Within just a few weeks, Allied troops had seized key cities, met in Tehran, and effectively divided Iran into zones of occupation, Soviet in the north, British in the south, with the capital in between. The fall of Reza Shah under intense Allied pressure. Reza Shah abdicated on September the 16th, 1941, and was sent into exile, eventually dying in South Africa. His 22-year-old son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, became the new Shah. For many Iranians, this was a humiliating moment. A supposedly neutral country had been invaded, its ruler forced out, and foreign troops now dictated what was safe for Iran and what was not. Yet, at the same time, Iran was promised protection and aid, something that would become very important by the end of the war. Promises on paper. In January 1942, Iran, Britain, and the Soviet Union signed a tripartite treaty, The Allies promised to respect Iran's independence and territorial integrity and pledged to withdraw all their forces within 6 months after the end of the war. At the Tehran Conference in late 1943, when Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin met in Iran's capital to plan the defeat of Nazi Germany, they publicly reaffirmed their commitment to Iranian independence and promised economic assistance. Here's a surprising detail. The leaders of the Big Three arrived in Tehran with heavy security and elaborate plans, but Iran's own government was informed only shortly beforehand and was not fully told who exactly was coming, which many Iranians later saw as another insult to their sovereignty. Life in occupied Iran. Behind those diplomatic declarations, everyday life in Iran during the occupation was harsh. The country became a vast transit route, with railways and roads crowded by Allied military shipments and foreign personnel. Shortages, inflation, and strain on local resources contributed to social tension, while refugees from Europe, including Polish and Jewish refugees, passed through or settled temporarily in Iran, turning it into an unexpectedly global wartime crossroads. By September 1943, Iran declared war on Germany, not because it had independent military ambitions, but to formally align with the Allies and qualify for membership in the new United Nations that was already being imagined. The war ends, but not the occupation. When World War II in Europe ended in 1945, the treaties said that all Allied troops were supposed to leave Iran within 6 months, which meant early 1946. British and later American forces began withdrawing, but the Soviet Union was in no hurry to abandon northern Iran and its potential oil resources and influence. Instead, Soviet forces supported the creation of two short-lived autonomous entities, the People's Republic of Azerbaijan, centered on Tabriz, and the Kurdish Republic of Mahabad, both backed with Soviet arms and advisors. The Iranian Crisis of 1946. By late 1945 and early 1946, Iranian government troops trying to reassert control clashed with these Soviet-backed forces, leading to thousands of casualties and raising the frightening possibility that Iran might be permanently partitioned. Tehran took the issue to the brand-new United Nations Security Council, and the crisis over Soviet troops in Iran became one of the world body's first major tests, and, in the eyes of many historians, one of the first real confrontations of the emerging Cold War. Under intense diplomatic pressure from the United States and international scrutiny at the UN, Soviet leader Joseph Stalin eventually agreed to withdraw Soviet troops in 1946 in exchange for a proposed joint oil company in northern Iran. Iran's quiet countermove. Here comes another twist that often gets overlooked. Once the Red Army pulled out and the Iranian state had reasserted control over Azerbaijan and Mahabad, the proposed Soviet Iranian oil concession was submitted to the Iranian parliament, the Majlis. In 1947, the Majlis simply refused to ratify it, effectively killing Stalin's hopes for a long-term oil foothold in northern Iran and turning what looked like a Soviet victory into a diplomatic defeat. In the end, Iran preserved its territorial integrity, but the memory of invasion, occupation, and great power bargaining on its soil left deep scars on Iranian politics and public opinion. What it meant for Iran. So, what happened to Iran at the end of World War II was more than just the withdrawal of foreign troops. It was the beginning of a new era in which Iran had to navigate between superpowers in a world sliding from hot war into Cold War. The Anglo Soviet invasion had removed Reza Shah, installed his young son, turned Iran into a vital supply corridor, and then left the country as the stage for one of the first global crises after 1945. From Tehran's perspective, the story is one of survival. Surviving being invaded while neutral, surviving being used as a transit route, and surviving an early attempt to break the country apart. Now that you've heard this story, here's the question I'd love to hear your thoughts on in the comments. Do you think the British and Soviet decision to invade neutral Iran in 1941 was a necessary wartime strategy to stop Hitler and secure supply lines? Or was it an unjustified violation of a small country's sovereignty that set the stage for decades of mistrust between Iran and the great powers? Let me know what you think, and tell me which part of this episode in Iran's history surprised you the most so we can explore it deeper in a future video.